Many parts of the world are experiencing extraordinarily high temperatures, and the current projections are for this to continue for at least another 4 years.
It's very easy to think of storms or hurricanes because they're spectacular events. We know when they're coming, we can see them on TV, we can see them on the radar and everything else, and we know that they're coming. But it's not easy to see a drought coming. As a matter of fact, we don't see a drought coming. All we know is that, well, it didn't rain last month and it's not raining this month either. And at some point, then you'll hear the Met Service will declare that there is a drought.
Much of the Caribbean is very dependent on tourism, which will also be affected, especially by an increase in the incidence of severe weather conditions. If you have one major hurricane every few years, you have time to build back. But if you have a major hurricane every year, or 2 in a year, then it's very hard to have any kind of managed recovery.
We need to start looking in terms of our tourism industry. How are we going to deal with climate and tourism? It's not just a matter of making sure that our rooms are going to be more comfortable by turning up the air conditioning. It's also going to be, how do we manage our beaches? How do we manage the coastal zone? How do we manage mangroves? How do we manage coral reefs? For several things. One is that the environment is changing, and the environment is changing in such a way that makes beaches more fragile, so we have to manage those beaches better.
We have to take into account what climate change is going to do in terms of changing patterns of agriculture. But now we also have to think what rising sea level is going to do in terms of changing the landscape.
The reason for sea level rising is because as the oceans get warmer, they expand, and as they expand, they rise. And that means that the high water marks, the high tide levels, all the ways in which we expected the ocean to behave based on what we've known for the last 50 or more years, those are going to begin to change as well. And we see that in the Caribbean already.
Climate change is not inevitable. The decisions we take today are going to determine whether we end up with a livable situation or a truly apocalyptic scenario. What we have to do is, as societies, not just as communities, entire societies, nations, have to become much more energy and resource efficient.
It really is about finding ways to deal with the quick changes, finding ways to deal with these singular events which we know about, such as hurricanes and tropical storms, and finding ways to deal with the slow events, the drought, the sea level rise, the ocean acidification, all of which are going to have the capacity to make life more difficult for us. So we have to learn how to adapt.
If we manage to reduce our carbon emissions, if we manage to stay close to the lower bound, then the level of adaptation required, it's not negligible, but it's more achievable. If we end up with some of the more apocalyptic scenarios, then we're talking about large parts of the Earth's surface becoming uninhabitable.
It's almost certain that if we put the intellectual capacity of all the people in the Caribbean together and work with the people who live in the islands and the people who live on the mainland with the Caribbean coast, and we look at the problems that we all will be facing, that we can definitely solve them. We can build resilience in the Caribbean and we can move forward.